Today's guest is Aditi Sethi-Brown, an end-of-life doula, hospice physician, and the co-founder of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter, here with Helen Bauer.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at GrandPad. Do you have an older family member who's isolated, or do you feel disconnected from a senior loved one who lives at a distance? The folks at GrandPad have come up with the perfect solution, an easy-to-use device that connects older adults with family and friends using video chat, email, photo sharing, and more. Visit grandpad.net for details. We should have said today's guest is an all-around lovely human, a musician, a contemplative soul. This was a very deep, very moving, very insightful interview.
You can tell that she is very thoughtful in her responses to our questions.
Yes.
She takes her time. She thinks about it. She contemplates what her answer is going to be. And she's just so wonderful and so insightful.
So open.
Yes, very much so. So Dr. Aditi Sethi-Brown has worked in hospice all her adult life. She started as a volunteer when she was 17.
17 years old.
I don't know many people who do that. More recently, she works as a hospice physician and an end-of-life doula. She's very passionate about expanding awareness of the lessons that death holds, as you'll hear in this interview. Aditi is also the co-founder of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. She's passionate about the death-positive movement that's really blooming in our society right now.
So what more can we say about this lady except to gush over how wonderful she is? So without further discussion from us, because it doesn't need any more, here's our conversation with the lovely human, Dr. Aditi Sethi-Brown.
Aditi, it is our pleasure to have you on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to start with an icebreaker question.
Okay, just
put you on the spot.
Warm things up.
Yes, warm things up. Okay, so if you could only have one color in your wardrobe, what would it be?
I think a rust color, sort of a salmon, red, orange color. I find that very, very soothing and nourishing and rich.
Yeah. So is that one of your favorite colors?
I would say so. Yes.
Good.
I think that color is very trendy right now too. So that's good.
Nothing about trends. So that's great to hear.
I don't either. I just made that up, quite frankly. So let's reminisce a little bit. You started volunteering in hospice at age 17. You were young. How did that affect your career path when it came to moving into being a hospice physician?
Yeah, so when I had the opportunity to volunteer for hospice, I had a thought that I might go into medicine. I grew up in a community of physicians, but I also wanted to make sure that was really in alignment with who I was and my purpose in being here. And so the hospice experience as a volunteer for me was so eye-opening and enriching and inspiring. And so just death awareness became such a part of my life from that point on. And when I decided to go to medical school, I don't think I knew or realized that a hospice physician was even a possibility in my stars, and being a hospice physician was a possibility. But I also brought that death awareness to my training. And so when I started medical school, I sort of feel like I observed how we talk about death and deal with death, because I had the awareness of how it could be and how hospice could serve the whole person and really honor this phase of life. Whereas I felt that as a system back then, 20 years ago, we didn't even have any curriculum in medical school for end-of-life care. There was maybe a 1-hour talk on death. And it was actually the play Wit, a beautiful play about a woman who's been diagnosed with cancer and who's going through the medical system, and how dehumanizing it was for her. So it wasn't even directly about death. It was about a cancer diagnosis and ultimately death. But so that awareness was such a part of my experience. And I honed in on how people talked about death, how we ignored death, how people feared medicating people who were suffering at the end of life in the hospital setting. I had senior residents tell me, I'm not giving that guy morphine, not soul, that's my word. I'm not going to give more morphine to this guy that's dying of DIC, which is he's bleeding out basically and suffering. And he said, I'm not going to overdose him. If I give him more morphine, he's going to die. And I just thought, wait a second, what? It's just mind blowing. And so I noticed so many misconceptions of what hospice was. Palliative care wasn't really a big thing in my organization at that time, in my institution. And then I ended up seeking that out myself, that part of the training. And I did a fellowship, month-long internship in Chicago, and I brought some of those pearls back and did a week lunch and learn series. And, so I had to become an activist really at an early on in my training. And then I ended up loving everything about medicine. I loved every rotation. I loved surgery, getting up at 4 a.m. And, I just loved OB. I loved all of it. So I ended up training in family medicine, still not knowing that I would ultimately specialize in hospice care, but thinking I might, later in my career. And I thought maybe I fell in love with Haines, Alaska before med school, and I thought I'd go back there and be a doc in the bush. And I did some rotations out there during my training, but all along there was just this deep desire to be with the dying, and I didn't fully understand that. And ultimately, there's a fellowship that was created partly because I think I planted the seed as an intern, my training. So I was the first fellow in Asheville, and then the rest is history. It's become my life's work. So it's a long-winded way of answering that question, but yes, it was integral to my path.
So it's interesting that you came to your education as a physician with a knowledge and awareness that most medical students don't come with. They don't find that until years into their training.
Right.
That the death care part, those conversations, that type of care is important. So vital to the work that we do, and yet we seem to miss it. So what a gift for you to come to your training with that awareness already. When did you work on your end-of-life doula training? When did that factor in?
Yeah, so I finished my training in 2012. And then in 2017 is when the doula training found me, I would say. Taryn Estes founded the Conscious Dying Institute, and it's based in Boulder, but she organized her first cohort here in Asheville. And the training happened to be in my house. We have an extra, like an event space that we use for music events and ceremony and gatherings. I'm in it right now, actually. And it's called the Raga Room. And so the training was in my home, and I had a 4 or 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and it just felt like the right thing to do. And it was life-changing, really. It's very powerful for me.
So how do you combine these roles of being a hospice physician and an end-of-life doula? So how do these disciplines differ, and how are you able to use the similarities to your advantage?
So I'll first say that my approach to hospice doctoring was very much a holistic approach to caring for individuals. I was able, even at the bedside in the inpatient hospice facility I worked in for 10 years, I would bring elements of my spirit and my philosophy and all of those things to the bedside, and with a limited capacity given the demands of being a physician, a lot of which sadly is documentation, admin sort of tasks, certifications and narratives and all these things. I would integrate aspects of my being into my practice at the bedside. But as the culture has changed, somewhat in the hospice model of care, my role became more siloed. I had to become as financial constraints, shifted staffing ratios, for example, I was actually told, you really need to let the social worker do the social work part, let the chaplain do the chaplain part. And I found myself not having as much time and space to be present. And so knowing that this doula approach to death, which is really a non-medicalized supportive presence that addresses multi-dimensions of a human being and their families, knowing that was available to me, it's been sort of a blessing to know that I can do that as able. And I'm still trying to find a way to integrate it all, but I've had private souls that I've taken, I would say private clients, but so far it's been mainly volunteering, friends of family and acquaintances. And then the soul Ethan Sisser, who I'll mention again, but I got to really be a doula for individuals separate from my practice as a physician. And I get to bring a lot more of my presence, my music, my spirituality, the altar creation. I mean, environmental, like sort of how the space can be. I can bring aspects of myself to create space for people in different ways. So it's been really beautiful.
So you sort of separate the two then. You do the end-of-life doula work as a volunteer. That way, you're not really combining the two in any way. But I can imagine, though, that how can you really separate them as well? How can you possibly separate, one from the other? I'm sure when you're doing your work as a hospice physician, you still think about some of the things that you could integrate from your training as an end-of-life doula. So that's really good that you have both of those. And I'm sure as an end-of-life doula, there's things that as a hospice physician that you can integrate in with your work as an end-of-life doula. So,
why would you want to separate those things?
Right, exactly.
Oh, I'll give you some good reasons.
Okay.
Well, so liability, right? And
of course,
the idea of medication management. And so what I think about when I think about being a physician, that's a role that I have. That's a set of skills I have, but it's not who I am. It's not all of who I am. And so I have thought down the road that I will integrate my practice as a physician with that of an end-of-life guide, is how I've been calling it. And I could offer medication management, write prescriptions, and have a more integrated practice. But right now it is separate. And I say to people that I am your non-medical support, and we will speak with your hospice program, and I can always talk to your physician, but I have a set of skills that I can use, but I'm not acting as a physician. And for me right now, as I'm navigating it all, it sort of alleviates that question of liability and insurance and all of those things that come with the practice of medicine.
Yeah. Dual roles can be confusing for our patients and their families. Yeah, exactly.
So far, it's been really good. I just say, hey, I'm not your medical provider.
Right. Just very clear.
I need to have skills and a knowledge that I can share with you, but it's not the role I'm playing right now. And so far, it's been okay.
And it's important for everybody on the interdisciplinary team to understand the roles of the other team members. And I don't think we always do that very well, especially as nurses. We totally get the clinical piece, but I don't know what you chaplains are doing over there. I think sometimes we don't represent or portray the other disciplines very well because we don't necessarily understand what they do. So I think you have a unique perspective to look at what companioning might be as an end-of-life guide and end-of-life doula. Most physicians don't get to be there for that part.
Right. And, I think I respect the roles and the boundaries that we've created. There's a reason that they're in place. And when we work as an interdisciplinary team, if we're all doing our part to contribute to the whole, it can work magically. And I've also seen how we've put too much emphasis on these roles. I had a good friend who's a CNA who, when you think about a CNA, they are the most involved in patient care, direct care, intimate, vulnerable spaces with an individual. They're in those spaces. And so naturally, an individual may want to confide in the CNA for counsel and guidance and friendship. And I've heard stories of CNAs being reprimanded for having conversations about spiritual aspects of dying, and they're told that that's not in their lane and that's not that's not appropriate. The chaplain should do that. And so imagine what that feels like when you can't be a whole person because you're identified with that role. It's just not sustainable. And it's actually, I think, a part of why people are burning out so much. And we have an issue, in our system right now. And so I want to just say that I respect roles and boundaries. And I also think we can blur them a little bit.
Right. There needs to be this balance between being able to fulfill the needs of the patient when you're there. And obviously, as a chaplain, I'm not going to go in and try to give clinical advice. It's out of my lane completely. But at the same time, I can always make sure that they get what they need and find the people who can help them. I can understand where you're coming from with the CNA, being there in the present moment. They need to be able to provide some help and counsel in the moment, but then also refer them to the chaplain at some point as well. So I'm interested in your end-of-life doula work and I'm interested in finding out what you think is going to be the future for the work of end-of-life doulas in hospice. Do you see that particular, can we say, discipline becoming more integrated into the work in hospice?
Yeah. I think we don't have a choice but to get creative with how we talk about death and how we prepare for death. And in my 20 plus years as a volunteer and then a physician in hospice, I have found that many people still come to death unprepared and terrified and uneducated about what it looks like, what we should be thinking about, things to consider. And we know that still about only 30% of people have their advance directives filled out in our country. And I think 70% don't even know what palliative care is. So we've relied on the medical system for so long to help shift our cultural perceptions on death. And what's happening now with the death doula movement is that as hospice once started as a grassroots movement, so too is this death positive movement happening. And there is room for collaboration and there is room for integration if the medical system allows it and gets creative. So I do see that happening where people way upstream, even before palliative care is involved, start having these, creative ways of engaging in this conversation. It's already happening with death cafes and the like, death over dinners. And then there's just sort of this cultural shift in how we deal with death. And then palliative care comes in, hospice comes in. After death care is even more honored and talked about and prepared for. And then the grief work. So it's just this continuum in this whole lifespan that we have, rather than this, crisis-driven, delayed referral approach to hospice care.
And we've seen a lot of that where people are coming into hospice much later than they should be. I mean, if we could have the opportunity to see them earlier than we do, hospice could be such a great benefit to them and to the families. Too often they come to us very late in the disease trajectory, and it just doesn't allow us to have the opportunity to give them the full benefit of what we have to offer. So I totally see what you're saying, and I agree with that. So as a hospice physician, as someone who really has been integrated in end-of-life care for a long time, what's the most meaningful part of the work that you do? When you think of your personal work, what is the most meaningful part for you as you work with seriously ill and dying patients?
I would say that being in the presence of someone who is looking at death straight on, directly looking at their mortality and experiencing the reality of them eventually leaving their bodies sooner than later. It's the most profound, centering experience that I can imagine on the planet. And so for me, the dissolving of the ego, the what I've done in my life, though that's a beautiful thing to reflect on, my accomplishments, my achievements, my personality, my successes, all of that sort of just dissolves, and you're just in this presence of a being and their spirit. And it's so beautiful and powerful, and it inspires me every day, and I love the realness and the rawness that is a part of the dying experience. It's not always pretty. It's not always, elegant, but it's real. It's raw. Even if there's agitation and restlessness and fear and doubt, there's this allowing an opportunity to be present with all of those in a very real way without trying to fix and just bearing witness. It's such a gift.
There's an intimacy, to a sacred intimacy to being with someone as they do this. I think this would resonate with a lot of people who work in end-of-life care. Yeah, there's a universal feeling. And you talk about it centering you. I think it also draws us to them. If we're open to it, being empathic and compassionate, I think it draws people. People talk a lot about how this is their calling. Or they stumbled into it, which was my story, stumbling into it and then finding, wow, incredible work. How could I ever want to work in any other, niche of the industry? So I think that kind of thing, it resonates with a lot of people who work with us.
Definitely calling. Yeah. I never really called my work, I never said it was work or a job. Just felt like it's what I'm here to do. How I spend my time.
Isn't that wonderful? It's not I have to go to work. It's I get to go to work.
Yeah,
How many people get to say that?
Right.
The team at GrandPad has created a great device to help families stay connected despite distance and lockdowns. The GrandPad utilizes a simple format that allows seniors to easily access technology. Internet access, video chat, and email, along with games and music, are just a few of the features the GrandPad offers. GrandPad comes with 4G LTE cellular service already included, so there's no need for Wi-Fi. Users can create a private family network that allows for secure photo and video sharing. At the core of the GrandPad team are the Grand Advisors, a group of seniors that continually inspire, test, and guide the development of GrandPad. The company has built a platform that empowers seniors of all ages and technological skills to safely connect with family, friends, and caregivers. No spam, no robocalls, only connections with those you trust, family, friends, and caregivers. The GrandPad team strives to create a world where no seniors are lonely or isolated. Using innovation and current communication tools, they keep older adults connected to their younger family members. To purchase a GrandPad subscription for your loved one, visit grandpad.net. Or to purchase multiple devices for your business or facility, visit grandpad.biz. Now on to today's episode. Working in end-of-life care, we know has its stigmas or misperceptions that people have about hospice in general, I think. They look at it and they're like, oh, why would you ever want to do that? Or they look at us and they go, I don't know how you do that. I could never do that. I could never work with people who are dying like that. And of course, those of us who work in hospice, we sort of, just kind of shrug and go, but this is what I do, and I love what I do. And
yes, I'm normal.
well, as normal as we can be, I suppose.
Right, as normal as anybody is.
Right. What do you find is the biggest obstacle for end-of-life professionals who are faced with those kind of negative perceptions of hospice care?
Are you saying specifically interprofessionally with other professionals, or in terms of their own dealing with those misperceptions internally, or how are you?
I think from a personal perspective, how do we handle this feeling of being misunderstood? Because I think the general public looks at what we do and they think those people, they're just different, because
weird.
They're able to, they're a little bit weird, that they do this kind of work and seem to like it. What's wrong with them? How do you think most hospice professionals can overcome the population's perception of us? Do we just kind of shove it aside and say they don't understand? Or how do we handle that? How can we handle that?
Yeah, I think a contemplative approach to life, independent of our work, can really support our ability to stay attuned and aligned to what we're doing and why we're doing it. So if we self-reflect on our work and we feel called to be doing it still and see the value in it and see the impact it has, which we all know it has a deep impact when done well, hospice care can really be transformative for the individual who's dying and their families. And so we know the value of it. I think the more we stay grounded in that, then all of the other perceptions, doubts, fears, judgments that come from professionals as well as community members won't sway us as much. And we can stay focused on what we're doing and advocate for what we're doing and speak to what we're doing in a way that serves the whole system. Because really in medicine, it's considered the soft medicine. There's not a lot of complex interventions that we do. And so I could see how the ego would feel less than in the medical model, because we're not surgeons, we're not cardiologists doing this. Though we are. Many specialists are now doing end-of-life care and palliative care. And because we think of death as a failure, that plays a role in people's perception of what we're doing in the medical system. So I think, again, just being aware of those things and not letting them affect the work that we're doing. And speaking to those things and not being afraid to speak to what's underlying the judgment and the misperceptions, which to me is inherently a fear of death. And this deep belief in our medical model that we are separate from nature, that we have to destroy, anything that's quote unquote invading our bodies, right. That we don't have inherent wisdom that, so I could go on and on, but yes.
Very good answer, though. I like that. And I like the contemplative approach that you mentioned. I think we all really need to be able to sort of get inside of our own minds and come up with an answer to why we do what we do. It comes back to our why. Why are we doing this? And when we have our why, then we can do this without any sense of guilt or misunderstanding or even concern about what others' perceptions might be of us. So I like that. I like that idea very much.
I love what you just shared. And I think bringing it back to the 17-year-old in me that was the hospice volunteer, I think because I was so aware of death and the reality of the transience of this life, those were the questions that you just spoke to that I pondered and that guided me throughout my life. So I ended up studying religious studies, and I became a religious studies minor. I actually created my own major, but I was on a quest to answer those questions, and it guided me back to the end-of-life care ultimately. So I think that idea that reflecting on death can really impact your living is such a powerful, and death being such a powerful teacher, it has guided me, been a guiding principle.
It's an amazing gift to us when we work in end-of-life care. Maybe that's why we stay. That's something, if you don't work in the industry, you can't understand. You really can't. But it is a gift to be able to do this. It really is. Otherwise, why in the world would we do it? We'd have to be dumb. We'd have to be crazy. So, talking about personal experiences, right? Your journey as a 17-year-old, experiencing death awareness and learning that way and then moving through your career. You've also had a personal loss, your mother-in-law. You describe her as your dear friend. And you and your husband had a green burial for her. We'd love to hear you talk about that experience and what that meant for you, and maybe share some music with us.
Sure.
That sort of reflects back on that loss and that experience for you.
Thank you. So Paula Costello-Brown was truly one of my dearest friends, and still is with me. And I actually met her 2 or 3 days before I met her son. She was my neighbor. I was renting out a basement apartment next door and fell in love with her instantly. And she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2019, actually diagnosed 2 months before she died, and chose to spend her final days here in our home in Asheville, Black Mountain. And I was pregnant with our third child, and it was one of the most profound experiences holding both of those realities and being so intimate with both of those, birth and death. And her dying process was in our home, surrounded by loved ones. People came from all over to visit her and to honor her and to celebrate her while she was in the bed and declining. And she allowed that to happen. She allowed for vulnerability and intimacy and sadness and grief all to come up in those moments of singing song and bearing witness to what she was going through. And my children were really integrated into that experience as well, which was powerful for them. And I always gave them the choice, whatever you feel comfortable with. So when she took her last breath, Jay and I knew, my husband Jay, we knew that we wanted to do a home funeral. We wanted to be the ones to prepare her body. And she had made a comment once that she didn't want to be bagged up and put in a morgue in a cold freezer. Her mother actually died in Atlanta and was transported via the funeral home to Birmingham and was lost en route. So they lost her for a few hours. They didn't know where she was. And Paula just said that was the worst experience. And I just don't want that. So I don't want to even risk that. So she was open to us doing a home funeral, which really means we as family are the funeral home. We get to tend to her body. We get to prepare her body and keep her in state for a defined period of time. We did it for about 36 hours. So at that point, she has 7 sisters, and probably over 50 people were in and out of our house for months, weeks at least. And when she took her last breath, I think there were about 20 people in our space, including sisters and other relatives, and nobody had done a home funeral. And they actually didn't know if they'd be able to participate emotionally. So Jay and I at one point looked at each other and we said, if nobody else can do this, do we feel like we can do this? And we both came to the knowing that, yes, we will take care of Paula's body alone if we have to. I did have a dear friend, Ruth, as a home funeral guide, who showed up and was on standby. So we, at the time of her last breath, all the sisters decided to join in this honoring of her body. And it was so profound. We carried her body from the downstairs room outside and into this space, the Raga room, where she was bathed and adorned with flowers and honored. And lots of tears, lots of emotion, but such beauty and time and space to be with her body and to really feel into what just happened. So in the 48 hours that ensued, we played music, we had poetry, we allowed community members to come in and honor her body, we lit candles. It was just beautiful. The children rolled out white paper and did artwork honoring Paula, and, just beautiful experience. And then Jay and I, we shrouded her in this beautiful white shroud, and we put her in our minivan, Jay and I. The kids went elsewhere because that might have been a little bit much. And we drove her to Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, a conservation green burial ground in Asheville, one of the few in the country. And it was so surreal and almost funny and comic. It was just, we were just like, what is happening here? The veil was so thin, and here's her body. And we knew she wasn't in it. And yet, so we were so connected to it. It was just a powerful experience. And then we had a procession where all her loved ones were holding her wicker basket, and she was shrouded in it, adorned with flowers. And we walked to the graveside and had a beautiful honoring of her life there are some images, actually. A woman who was present during that service is a writer, and she wrote a book. And an article was published in the Washington Post about this story. And so you can check that out. And so there's some images that come along with that. And we sang songs. We spoke of her and cried and yearned for her to, just her presence again, knowing that that wasn't a possibility. But it was so beautiful. And the children were right there next to her shrouded body, so close and intimate, And then we got to put her in the ground and close the grave with dirt and shovels, and there she rested. So it's a powerful experience.
Very moving. So, Aditi, will you share some of your music with us?
Yeah, Paula liked this song called I'm a Mystery. It's a very simple. So I sing Indian music, contemplative Indian music that's often repetitive. And part of that is the slowing down of the nervous system, the connection to spirit as you stay in that vibration of the repetition. So it's a repetitive song. It was based on a quote from a spiritual teacher in India whose disciples begged him to write an autobiography, and he refused multiple times. And after pestering, he finally said, "Fine, come back to me tomorrow. I will have written my autobiography." His name was Ananda Murthy, so the Ananda Margi tradition leader. And the disciples came back the next day, and they sat at his feet, so excited to see what his autobiography would be in such a short time. How could he have written this masterpiece? And he pulled out one sheet of paper, and he said, "I was a mystery. I am a mystery. And I will always be a mystery." So.
Incredible.
How beautiful. How beautiful is that?
Thank you. Thank you. What an offering. Well, I feel like we should end right there, but we do have a couple of other things we want to talk about. You have a new endeavor, the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. Tell us about the work that you're doing there.
So out of my years of caring for the dying, for supporting thousands now, I became really clear that there were certain gaps that I felt the medical system couldn't quite fill. And out of that emerged this nonprofit, the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. And it speaks to much of what we've shared in this time together around remembering that death is not simply a medical event, that it's truly a social, relational, spiritual, communal experience. And so the Center for Conscious Living and Dying has various components, a direct care piece where we honor and support those that are dying, that need a home to die in, a space to die in, whether they don't have caregiving support or they don't have a physical home, which are both required for hospice to come in. So the Omega Home Network has been a really wonderful resource as I move towards the creation of one in Asheville. And then education and outreach. So experiential education, practical preparation, apprenticeship for doulas. That's something that's not so present. Despite the rise in training programs, there's not many opportunities for doulas to practice and prepare for death and prepare for work with the dying. So that's a part of the vision. Experiential living experiences too, conscious living. So music and good food and community and ultimately how we care for the aging. So it's all integrated into this vision.
Wonderful.
In development. Yeah.
So tell our listeners how they can connect with you.
Okay. Currently, I have a website, aditisethi.md.com, ADITISETHIMD.com. Center for Conscious Living and Dying has a website in development, so you can look out for that, and a Facebook page. And there is a film, a documentary that should be released this fall called The Last Ecstatic Days Movie. So you can go to thelastecstaticdaysmovie.com and learn about this incredible soul's journey. Ethan Sisser, who is a 36-year-old dying of a brain tumor, who shared his journey via social media and then ultimately called in a community to support his transition. And I was called in at first as an end-of-life doctor and then became his doula.
Amazing. So I will share in our show notes the links to your websites so people can connect with you on social media and watch for the release of the documentary. Incredible work you're doing. You're such a blessing to us today in this space and this conversation. You're an amazing person, and we are so glad to be connected with you.
Likewise. Thank you for the opportunity and for all that you're doing to share the good work.
She brings incredible gifts to her work. Not just the music. I mean, obviously she's very talented, but for her to bring her personhood, her humanity to each soul, as she refers to them, that she companions, that's a great gift from her, and it flows to her as well. You can hear it when she talks about the work that she does.
Right, which is why she's been in this work for such a long time.
Yeah, it's her why.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And she finds great meaning in doing this work, as I think all of us do who work in end-of-life care. And it shows in her in such thoughtfulness when it comes to the reasons why she does what she does. You know, she talked about the contemplative part of understanding why we do what we do. And I love that. I think most of us who come into hospice, so I'll share my story. I came into the work of hospice because I needed a job. Let's just be completely transparent and honest.
There's no shame in that. That I think a lot of hospice professionals experience their first jobs that way.
Right. And then as I worked in this, I began to become more contemplative and more introspective, and came to the point of facing my own end of life. How would this happen for me, and how can I, relate this to who I am today, and the work that I do. And I think all of us who work in end of life care have got to do that, otherwise we sort of fall apart and think, why am I doing this?
Well, I think when you talk about holistic care, yes, we have, as Aditi was saying, we have our boundaries and our roles that we play, but we don't bring only one part of our personhood to the care of our patients. Like she was talking about an aide, a CNA, going there and having that intimacy, that intimate relationship with a patient where they're providing that physical care. They're doing it more frequently. They have the most frequent contact of any discipline on the team. And then being told, don't have those conversations. If a patient brings that up, it's not your role. How devaluing is that?
Right.
It's invalidating. I think being able to bring my whole self to the care of the whole self of another patient, another soul, I think is very profound. Very profound. And it creates, in the person who's providing care, it creates such value for us.
It does. So I was just really moved by her story about her mother-in-law.
Amazing. I loved to hear, I don't know that we've ever had anybody on that actually talked about a green burial that they did, green funeral that they did with someone, or a home funeral.
Right, a home funeral and a green burial.
And a green burial for someone in their family. I don't know that we ever talked about.
No, and I loved the story and how they were able to integrate all of these people in the family. And some of them were like, I don't know if I can do this. But And yet they did. And they found it very meaningful and very moving.
Right. Now, that is a death legacy worth having. A memory, creating meaning, creating a memory. Amazing. So we hope you have enjoyed our conversation with this wonderful person, hospice physician, end-of-life doula. We would tell you, check out her website, connect with her on Facebook, connect with her organization, the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, and watch for their website to be up and coming. It's under construction. Hopefully by the time you hear this, the website will be up. And also watch out for the documentary that will be coming out as well that she described.
We'll have as many of the links to her as we can put into the show notes so that you can find it easy to get to all of those places.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer here with Jerry Fenter. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and please take a minute to leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, just send us an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.